For decades, Diana Ross wasn't just part of entertainment history. She stood above it. Her presence dominated stages, her voice echoed through generations, and her name became inseparable from fame itself. To millions across the world, she represented elegance, influence, and the kind of success most people only imagine.
She wasn't simply an artist. She became an era.
Year after year, her career continued rising while audiences watched in admiration. Records were broken, barriers disappeared, and her image transformed into something almost untouchable. From the outside, it looked like a life built entirely on applause, admiration, and endless celebration. But time has a way of revealing stories that success keeps hidden. As Diana Ross entered her later years and crossed into her 80s, people slowly began asking a different kind of question.
Not about the awards. Not about the fame. Not about the spotlight.
They began wondering about the person behind it all. What happens after spending a lifetime being recognized everywhere you go? What does silence feel like after decades of applause? How does someone adjust after existing for so long as a symbol instead of simply being human? To understand that answer, you have to go back to where everything started. Long before international stages, magazine covers, and global recognition, Diana Ernestine Earl Ross entered the world on March 26, 1944, in Detroit, Michigan. At that moment, nobody could have imagined what her future would become. She was simply a little girl growing up in a working-class environment during one of the most transformative periods in American history. Detroit during the 1940s and 1950s carried two realities at once: possibility and pressure. Opportunity existed, but so did struggle.
Dreams were everywhere, yet reaching them was never guaranteed.
For many people, life followed familiar patterns. But for Diana, something felt different. Music became more than entertainment. It became escape. It became direction. Every song seemed to open a window into a world larger than the one surrounding her. Even at a young age, there were signs. She carried ambition that stood out. There was confidence in the way she saw herself and determination in the way she moved forward. The people around her noticed it early. She never seemed interested in disappearing into ordinary life. Somewhere deep inside, she appeared to believe that her future would unfold differently than everyone expected. That quiet belief would eventually become the force that changed everything. During her teenage years, while still attending high school, Diana took a step that would unknowingly reshape music history, joining forces with close friends Mary Wilson and Florence Ballard to create a singing group that none of them yet understood would alter their lives forever. That small circle of ambitious young singers would eventually become known across the world as the Supremes, a name that would leave a permanent mark on music history. But the road to that moment looked nothing like the glamorous image people remember today. Before the fame, before the applause, before becoming cultural icons, there were setbacks, disappointments, and moments when success felt impossibly far away. Detroit's music scene was crowded with talent. Every performer wanted a chance. Every artist believed they could become the next big name. Yet what separated Diana and her group was not instant success, it was persistence. They kept moving forward even when recognition refused to arrive. That determination eventually led them to Motown Records, a company that would become one of the most powerful forces in American music. Once the opportunity arrived, everything began changing. As the 1960s moved forward, the Supremes transformed into something much bigger than anyone originally imagined. Their songs reached millions. Their performances became unforgettable. Their presence grew impossible to ignore. To audiences, their world looked perfect. Beautiful gowns, polished appearances, endless admiration, and a lifestyle most people could only dream about. But behind every perfect image is a reality the audience never sees. As Diana slowly became the face people associated most with the group, the pressure surrounding her intensified. Expectations became heavier. Every public appearance carried importance. Every performance invited criticism and praise at the same time. Every decision attracted attention. Fame no longer felt like a reward. It became a responsibility that followed her everywhere. The public admired the elegance while Diana experienced the exhausting pace required to maintain it. Long tours pulled her away from normal life. Interviews replaced personal time. Professional demands continued growing until comfort became secondary. With each new achievement came another invisible sacrifice. Many people imagine fame creates freedom, but the reality often becomes more complicated. The more recognizable someone becomes, the harder it becomes to protect the private parts of life that still matter. For Diana Ross, that tension slowly became part of her everyday existence. Her success opened extraordinary opportunities, but it quietly demanded extraordinary compromises. Relationships needed time she often couldn't give. Family moments became interrupted by commitment she couldn't escape. Simple experiences most people never think twice about slowly became rare. The higher she climbed professionally, the more distant ordinary life began to feel. To the world, she looked unstoppable. People saw achievement. People saw beauty. People saw a superstar who had reached the highest level of success. But what remained hidden were the emotional costs accumulating behind that image, the pressure to keep performing, the responsibility of maintaining expectations, and the exhaustion that comes from carrying a legacy while still trying to live a personal life. And that leads to one of the deepest questions in Diana Ross's journey. What happens when someone spends decades achieving almost everything imaginable, and eventually reaches a stage of life where success alone no longer answers every question? That answer didn't appear during the biggest celebrations of her career. It developed slowly across years of accomplishments, changing priorities, family responsibilities, and the unavoidable reality that time changes everyone. Then came another defining decision. Leaving behind a group that had become a worldwide phenomenon was a risk few artists would ever take. Most people expected success to end there. Diana saw it differently.
She believed her story had more chapters left.
In 1970, she officially stepped into her solo career, and almost immediately proved that her influence reached far beyond group success. Audiences stayed with her. Her popularity expanded. Her career entered another level entirely. Throughout the following decades, hit after hit continued strengthening her place in entertainment history. Her music reached everywhere. Her presence became unavoidable. And for a moment, it seemed as if no matter where people looked, Diana Ross was already there. As her solo career expanded, Diana Ross's music was no longer just heard. It was everywhere. Radio stations played her songs on constant repeat, concert venues filled with devoted audiences, and television appearances turned into major cultural moments. She was no longer simply a singer performing on stage. She had evolved into a living symbol of success, grace, and artistic power. Over time, her presence grew beyond music itself, shaping fashion, culture, and global entertainment standards. In 1972, she stepped into a completely new world with her film Lady Sings the Blues, portraying the legendary Billie Holiday. This performance revealed a deeper dimension of her talent that many had never seen before. The role was met with critical praise and earned her an Academy Award nomination, further establishing her as one of the most versatile entertainers of her generation. From that moment forward, Diana Ross was no longer defined by a single industry. She belonged to multiple worlds of performance, influence, and artistic recognition. As her career continued, awards and honors kept accumulating. The industry celebrated her not only as a successful recording artist but as a cultural force whose influence shaped generations. She became one of the best-selling female artists in music history, inspiring countless performers who looked up to her journey as proof that barriers could be broken and limits could be redefined. Yet, with every achievement came a new layer of expectation that grew heavier over time. Because success at this level rarely brings relief, it brings responsibility. Diana Ross was no longer expected to simply perform well.
She was expected to embody an ideal.
Elegance, perfection, confidence, and control became part of the image the world demanded from her at all times. The public no longer separated the person from the persona. They expected Diana Ross to always remain exactly what they believed her to be. But that kind of expectation becomes emotionally exhausting. For most people, difficult moments remain private. Mistakes fade without public attention, and personal struggles are allowed to exist quietly. But for someone living under constant visibility, there is no real escape from observation. Every appearance becomes a headline. Every absence becomes a question. Every change becomes a topic of discussion. Diana Ross spent decades living inside this unbroken cycle of attention. At the same time, another important chapter of her life was unfolding: family. Motherhood became one of the most defining parts of her identity. Despite the overwhelming demands of her career, she raised 5 children and often spoke about how deeply family mattered to her. But balancing global fame with parenting responsibilities was never simple.
Her schedule rarely paused.
Concert tours continued, recording sessions remained constant, interviews filled her time, and public appearances never stopped demanding her presence. Like many high-achieving individuals, she found herself constantly divided between 2 worlds, one built on ambition and public success, and another rooted in personal responsibility and emotional connection. Those closest to her understood that the image seen by the world was only a fraction of her reality. Behind the spotlight was a woman navigating the same challenges many parents face, trying to stay present, trying to maintain bonds, and trying to hold a family together despite a life that never slowed down. As the decades passed, a new kind of challenge quietly began to take shape. The music industry that had once celebrated Diana Ross as one of its brightest stars was no longer the same world she had entered. Styles evolved, new genres emerged, and younger artists stepped forward with fresh sounds that captured global attention. The spotlight that once stayed fixed on established legends gradually began shifting toward a new generation. For many artists, this transition is natural. But for those whose identities are deeply tied to long-standing public recognition, it can feel disorienting. The conversation slowly changes. Instead of focusing on what comes next, people begin asking what has already been achieved. Instead of anticipation, there's reflection. And for someone who spent decades at the very center of global culture, adapting to that shift requires a level of emotional strength that few truly understand. Diana Ross continued to perform, record music, and connect with audiences around the world. But time, no matter how quietly it moves, leaves undeniable traces.
Friends grew older.
Colleagues and fellow artists from earlier eras passed away. Entire chapters of music history that once felt alive slowly transformed into memory. The world around her continued evolving, even as her legacy remained firmly rooted in the past she helped create. The industry she once shaped so powerfully no longer looked the same as it did during her rise.
Yet from the outside, much of her public image appeared unchanged.
The elegance remained. The recognition remained. The admiration remained. To audiences watching from afar, it often seemed as if time had barely touched her journey. But what remained unseen was the emotional weight that comes from living a life constantly measured against its earlier version. Aging is a universal experience, but for public figures, it carries a different kind of pressure. It is not only about growing older, it is about being compared to who you once were. For Diana Ross, this reality became increasingly significant as she entered the later stages of her career.
Questions of legacy began to surface more often. How would she be remembered?
What would her influence truly mean in the long run? Would her impact be defined only by awards and records, or by something deeper that extended beyond fame itself? These questions become more powerful when a person has already achieved nearly every milestone their industry can offer. While the world continued to celebrate her extraordinary career, a quieter chapter of life was gradually approaching. A chapter no longer driven by constant performance, chart positions, or public recognition. Instead, it was shaped by reflection, family, aging, and the personal realities that eventually touch every human life regardless of fame or success. For the first time, Diana Ross was entering a stage where the most meaningful experiences were no longer happening under stage lights. They were unfolding in the private spaces she had spent much of her life protecting from public view. And what that chapter reveals today offers a very different perspective on the woman the world thought it already knew. At 82 years old, Diana Ross stands as one of the most enduring figures in American entertainment history. A life that once moved at an unrelenting pace now exists in a slower rhythm shaped by reflection and time. For decades, her world was defined by motion, recording sessions, international tours, television appearances, award ceremonies, business commitments, and constant public attention. Years blended into one another in a continuous cycle of performance and travel. Millions knew her name. Millions recognized her voice instantly. But time eventually touches every life, no matter how iconic it may be. The reality Diana Ross lives in today is very different from the world that once revolved around her name. She still carries the presence of a global icon, and her legacy continues to command respect. But the rhythm of life is no longer defined by constant movement and non-stop spotlight. The crowds may still admire her, and her influence remains intact, yet the pace of everyday existence has naturally slowed with time. For many people watching from the outside, this contrast can feel emotional. They remember the version of Diana Ross who dominated stages, filled arenas, and shaped the sound of entire generations. They remember the energy, the glamour, and the unstoppable rise that made her one of the most recognizable figures in music history. When they compare that image to the quieter reality of aging, it can appear as if something has been lost. But in truth, it is not loss, it is transformation. At this stage of life, Diana Ross is no longer driven by the pursuit of new milestones in the same way she once was. The defining chapters of her professional journey have already been written. The awards, achievements, and historic accomplishments are part of the legacy she built over decades of dedication. Now, life has shifted into a different phase, one that is shaped more by reflection than ambition, and more by meaning than momentum.
Family has become a central part of that world.
Her children and grandchildren represent a legacy that extends far beyond the stage and the studio. While the world often focuses on her public image, those closest to her understand that some of her most important roles were never performed in front of an audience. They were lived quietly, in private moments that carried emotional weight far greater than fame. Aging, however, brings realities that no amount of success can avoid. Energy changes, time feels different, and the body begins to remind a person that life is moving forward in ways that cannot be controlled. For someone who spent decades performing at the highest level, this transition carries both emotional and physical adjustments. There is also the deeper reflection that comes with time, the awareness of how many years have passed, and how many people from earlier chapters are no longer present. Friends, colleagues, and fellow artists from her era have slowly become part of history. Entire generations that once shared the same stage, the same studios, and the same cultural moments are now gone. What remains is memory, legacy, and the responsibility of carrying forward a story that only a few still fully remember firsthand. Yet despite these changes, Diana Ross's influence has not faded. It continues through her music, through the artists she inspired, and through the cultural foundation she helped build. Her story is not defined by decline, but by endurance, by the ability to remain relevant across decades while navigating the natural passage of time. And perhaps that is where her story becomes most human. Beneath the fame and the legend is a life that reflects something universal, that success can shape history, but it cannot stop time. What truly lasts is not the spotlight itself, but the impact left behind, the memories, the inspiration, and the emotional connection carried forward by others long after the music fades. Diana Ross's journey reminds us that fame may fade, but legacy lives forever. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional celebrity journeys.
Comment your thoughts below. What moment impacted you the most? Stay connected for more powerful untold stories from music history.